Hi there. In this video, I'm going to talk about a topic that is a little complicated and it's called as the float. The purpose of float is to float the objects inside HTML document to either the left hand side of the screen or to the right hand side of the screen. So to demonstrate how float works, let me first take you to the HTML document. An HTML document is comprised of two sections: the head, denoted by the head inside the angular bracket, and then the head section is closed by the slash head tag. Then the body section starts with the body tag and is closed by the slash body tag. And inside that, if I put a paragraph, I have to use p tags, and it is ended by slash p. And I'll put some text in this paragraph, and I would also add an image. So I've already created an image, and I would call it the image name is float.png. So this body tag, just format it a little bit more. So this body tag, which encloses this body, has an image and a paragraph. Let us see how it looks when we run this in our browser. So as you can see, I have created this image, and this image is now uh, occupying the top portion of the browser screen, and then there's the text. This would be good if you want to keep it this way, but what about this text, this area that has not been occupied? It creates a lot of white space and is not good for usability. So what if I could wrap this text around this image and can create a nice floating picture kind of a thing, so that this text comes neatly inside this white space and fills this space up? To do that, all I need to do is go to this HTML file and add some CSS. To add the CSS, I have to use style tag, and it is closed by the slash style tag. And inside that, I can use the HTML tag called as img. And to float this to the left, I have to use float property and give it a property left and put a semicolon. Let us see what happens when we change the img css to float to the left. So as you can see, the white space on the side of the right side of the image has been filled by the text. I can keep adding the text and it will really look nice. Just I'll copy this text a little bit more. I did one more paragraph, and let us see how it looks like. So it looks really nice. You can add the padding and the margin. So this is the purpose of the float. So here I have floated the image to the left hand side. I can also float this image to the right hand side. So instead of putting the float to the left, all I need to do is float to the right. So the image now floats from the normal flow of the document and floats to the right, and the text is now coming around the on the left hand side of the image. So this is the basic purpose of the float. Now there's a big problem with the float. The thing is that if I enclose this whole thing in a div, for example, let's say I include this whole thing in a div, and the ID of the div, I call it as float test, and this whole thing goes inside the div. So if I just format it a little bit, now what should happen is that this whole thing should be very nicely floating inside this div. So if I want to give a border to this div, all I need to do is hash float test, and I'll give it a blue border. Let's say 2 pixel. solid border, and color is blue. Let us see what happens in this kind of scenario. So as you can see, there's some problem. The image is not inside the div. The image is cutting across the div. What we wanted was that image should have stayed inside the div, because then otherwise, if there's anything below this div, so anything below this div will now be overlapping the image, which is not what we want. And this is a major problem with the div. For example, if the coder has not carefully chosen this outer div to be expanding, then the image or the anything that is floated inside will definitely go over the size of the image, the floated object. So how do you resolve it? I normally resolve it with a very simple method. All I need to do is I give it float test as overflow property. I set it to auto, and width I give it to as 100%. So if I just refresh this file now, the image is now very well inside the float, inside the div. Some effect should be there if I float it to the left hand side. So the image and the text are now beautifully encased inside the div. Another way to clear this float is to add some kind of HTML to the floated container, the container that is floating some images. To do that, you have to go to the ending part of this div, the float test, and add another div which doesn't have any body. You can give it an ID, for example, called as clear float, and close this. Just don't give it any kind of body between these two tags. And to write the CSS, all you need to do is add this clear float as the ID with a hash in front of it, and inside that you can write the command clear and use both. You can clear left, you can clear right, and you can clear both. So let us see if there's any float problems we are going to face now. We have removed the overview and the width as 100%. So I have just refreshed this whole thing and there's no problem with the float. So this is second way of removing the float. There is a third and final way to remove the float problem, and that is without using any additional HTML in the document, but just using the CSS, and it is called as the after keyword, which is utilized after the div CSS. So to add this div through CSS, all we need to do is use the after keyword. So you'll use float test and put a colon after this and write the keyword as after, and then add the content as, for example, star. And after that we are going to clear the div. Let us say we clear both. Let us see whether it has any kind of effect on the object. So it has added a star here, but it has not actually cleared the div. The image is still on the top of this div. So to do that, all we need to do is make the display of this div as block. So you can see now the float has been clear. This whole thing, display block, has caused this star to occupy the complete space here, and the image is now safely inside this. But we don't want this star. To do that, we'll have to add one more keyword called as height, and we will make it 0. Now the height has been made 0, but the content has not gone. So to remove the content, we have to add another CSS command called as visibility, and we will give it the value hidden. So now as you can see, the float is gone. So what we did was we added a content and we cleared it, but it did not clear it at that time by just adding these two things. It just added the star. Then to enclose the image inside the div, we had to display it as a block, which caused this the whole image thing to fall inside the div. We had to make the height of the div as 0 so as to remove the additional height that was caused by this div, and visibility hidden was to make the content as invisible. So that is how we clear the float. So I hope I was able to explain to you how to add a floated content and how to solve the problem of content flowing outside the enclosing div to your satisfaction. Thanks for watching.